Hi, everybody. This is Gad Saad for the Saad Truth. It's been a while since my last chat on the show because I've been traveling extensively. But today I have a guest that I've known of him for many years. And unfortunately, I had yet to invite him, but I have corrected this grave error by inviting Raymond Ibrahim on the show. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, Gad. Good to be with you. I look forward to our conversation because I think I told you you're one of the most people always tell me I should talk with you. So I think there's a lot of syncretism going on between us.
Exactly. So I'm going to just introduce you first, then I'm going to break out some Arabic so that people know that you can't delegitimize us because we don't speak Arabic and we're not from the region and we don't understand true Islam and so on. So you are the distinguished senior Shillman Fellow at the Gatestone Institute. They do great work. And the Judith Friedman Rosen Fellow at the Middle East Forum. You have many books written. I'll start with your most recent ones and work backwards. You have a forthcoming book, The Two Swords of Christ, 5 Centuries of War Between Islam and the Warrior Monks of Christendom, coming in November, yes?
Correct.
Right? Then we've got in 2022, Defenders of the West, the Christian heroes who stood against Islam. And in 2018, Sword and Scimitar, which is a type of sword, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West. Then in 2013, Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christians. 2007, The Al Qaeda Reader. And then your master's thesis, and there's actually a link between your master's thesis and yours truly. You'll know in a second why. The Battle of Yarmouk, which was a very important battle in early Islam in the 7th century, an assessment of the immediate factors behind the Islamic conquests. Is there anything you'd like to add to this bio before we get going?
Those are my main books. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let me first, I'm going to get to the Arabic in a second, but can you guess what might be the link between your master's thesis and something of mine? It's hard to.
Are you somehow from the region of Yarmouk?
Well, I'm certainly from the
I mean,
general
that's in
region.
Syria, but yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I do have Syrian ancestor,
yeah.
grandparents. No, it's actually, and I didn't know this until I was doing my homework on your bio. Your supervisor is the glorious Victor Davis Hansen. Yes.
Right.
Now,
Yes.
this is from, sorry, don't mean to plug my own book here, but this is from my last book, my latest book, The Sad Truth About Happiness. I want to read you page 193, which is towards the end of the book. I recently held a chat on my show with the classicist and military historian Victor Davis Hansen. As we were saying our goodbyes, Victor ended our conversation with the following quote, "Thank you, and it's so nice to see an academic who smiles. I don't do it enough, but you do." Close quote. So, is that true? Was he as non-smiley and dour as when you knew him way back in the day?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, the guy that you see on TV is very much similar to the guy he is behind the scenes. Maybe a little more jaded and somewhat cynical, I suppose. But yeah, not necessarily with the biggest grin.
Right, exactly.
He's an old farmer.
He is an old. Actually, that's one of the things that I love and respect most about him because he's able to navigate. I mean, I think he calls it the musculature class,
Yeah,
right? So he's able to both be brawn, as you seem to be in very good shape, and muscular, and
thank you.
we can both have a mind and be athletic and physical and
Yeah,
hardworking with our hands. And so I
yeah,
highly respect that. Okay, I want to say a few words to you in Arabic. أول
yeah.
شيء تشرفنا.
شكرا.
تاني شيء أي أحلى لهجة بالعربي اللهجة اللبنانية أما اللهجة المصرية.
أنا أريد اللهجة المصرية طبعا بس ممكن أفهم اللهجة اللبنانية.
So I asked first. I said it's a pleasure to meet you, and then I said, as you probably know, there's always battles in terms of who's got the best food, who's got the best hummus, who's got the best accent, and so often people say that the two most beautiful Arabic accents are the Lebanese one and the Egyptian one. And so I asked Raymond, which is the more beautiful one, the Lebanese or the Egyptian? And he said, of course, I'm going to say Egyptian because he's an Egyptian Coptic Christian. So maybe we could start there.
And because مصر الدنيا, so
And because Egypt is the center, the mother of the world. So there you
As
go.
Egyptians love to say.
Exactly. Well, first of all, you maybe just tell us a bit about your background. You were born in Egypt or in the United States?
I was born in the United States. My parents immigrated here in the late 60s. I was born in 73. And yeah, and I grew up with this sort of rare ability of being bilingual because outside I was speaking English and at home I was speaking Arabic. And that's one of the main reasons, of course, you can imagine that sort of made me interested in the topics that I've definitely gravitated towards. Being a Christian from the Middle East who grew up in the West and who sees the ongoing threats of Islam both here and there obviously weighed on me. And so even back in the days with Victor Davis Hanson, as you saw, my Battle of Yarmouk, that was my thesis, which he was the chair, the advisor. And that was actually being written right before 9/11 in 2001. I was finishing it up. It actually was
Wow.
published, I think, right before it. And that's really what sort of catapulted me into this career because I was completely into the academic historical side, and I've never really been into modern politics. And I had just finished it, and then 9/11 happened. And then much later, fast forward, I'm at the Library of Congress, and we could talk about that. And I come across writings in Arabic by Bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda, which I translated in my book, The Al-Qaeda Reader. But what I was reading is they were actually citing all the battles that they were talking about the Battle of Yarmouk. They were using the same rationale of the guys that I was writing about in the 7th century, and which I, as a good college student, had been told was antiquated thinking. Nobody thinks that way, including Muslims anymore. And so that's what grabbed my attention initially, reading how, on the one hand, CNN and BBC and these people were relaying the communiques of Al-Qaeda, which was all about grievances, right? We hit you, you hit us, you support Israel, colonialism, crusades. They said it all. It was always a grievance, and they posited their retaliation as just that, retaliation, not aggression. But then the writings that Bin Laden and Zawahiri wrote to Muslims in Arabic, which CNN and BBC did not relay, and I did in my book, said the exact opposite. They sounded like ISIS. They were quoting the Battle of Yarmouk. They were talking about jihad against the infidel, irrespective of if they do good to you or bad to you. It has nothing to do with grievances. They need to be laid low, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I think, what really got me, it helped me cross the bridge from having sort of an academic interest in the history and doctrine of Islam to just seeing how totally applicable it was in the now. And on the other hand, how everyone was telling us it's not,
Right.
that there was no continuity, that, this has, and then a later problem, which we can get into, is even history was so corrupted. Now, even the historical presentation of Islam was not what it was, what I knew it was, as I had read it in these primary sources. So that's, so to give you a long story short about who I am, after that, I went to Georgetown University, the Center of Contemporary Arab Studies. And again,
Yes.
I'm still naive. I'm in my 20s. I
John,
don't know
John
anything.
Esposito world, right?
Yes. Yes. And he was there when I was there. And I had no idea about, the politics and political correctness. And I got all A's, but I got a lot of trouble because I would ask the questions you're not supposed to ask. And I remember offending Professor Voll, Voll, and he just got really angry. And anyway, a long story short, I got a job at the Library of Congress in the Middle Eastern Division. That's where I came across the Arabic writings, and I ended up just dropping from Georgetown because I didn't want to deal with it. And then I found the book, and I continued working there. And then, long story short, by 2008, 2009, I started becoming a fellow at various think tanks, Middle East Forum, later on the Hoover Institute, and then the Gatestone Institute. And basically from 2009, I've just been a writer primarily of books and articles, and the books that you mentioned, and probably 2,500 articles in that time frame. And most recently, I'm trying to be a YouTuber.
Well,
So
thank
I'm
you for
actually
coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm trying to, I've finally given in and realized that to reach the younger generations and maybe even the older ones, this is the medium to go, videos, because people are more, in tune with watching than reading. So I'm happy to oblige.
Well, look, first, thank you for that great sort of summary of your career. But I hate it, maybe just because I'm a professor, I hate it when I hear that a student has dropped out. Is there anything that I can say that can get you to go back and finish that damn PhD, or that's in the rearview mirror, never to be, gone over again?
You mean me personally?
Yes, you personally.
Well, I'll tell you why I did it. At first, it was a practical reason. Had the full-time job at the Library of Congress, which was, I mean, and I lived in that area, and the commute and the work was like 12 hours of my day essentially. And then I had the book project, the Al Qaeda Reader, which was a major book deal. It was reported all over the media, and so I was committed to that. And then the most important point, and Victor Davis Hanson actually told me this. We had to talk about my future career. And he was like, you already got what most people who, when they try to get a PhD, want.
Right,
okay?
true.
You got a major book deal, and this was a big book deal, and you work at the Library of Congress, and you're probably, and you can write what you want to write. And the second thing is, because you're doing what you're doing and writing what you're writing, even if you got your PhD, they're not going to hire you. Because,
but hold on. But as we know from Middle Eastern parents, you've removed the possibility of your parents showing off to all of their friends by introducing you as doctor. What are you doing, Raymond? Why are you so selfish to your parents?
I would agree, but they've both passed on, so it's not applicable at this point.
Allah yirhamun. May God redeem them. Okay, so let's get into. I was going to do some other stuff, but I want to just get into the Islamic doctrines. One of the things that I explain to people for many, many decades now, and of course it's fantastic to have a guest such as yourself here to kind of discuss these things, whether it be the Battle of Yarmouk or any other expansionist projects of Islam, that stems from the duality in Islam of having Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, the house or the salon of Islam, that's under dominion of Islam, and any other land that is yet to be unified under the unifying flag of Allah is really in the house of war. And any land that Islam conquers and then it loses, it has to canonically get back. Hence, we will, inshallah, get back El Andalusia. Anything you want to add to that? Anything you want to expand on? Because people don't understand that is one of the most fundamental precepts of Islam.
Yeah. First, I agree completely what you said. That is indeed the sort of dichotomy of how Islam sees the world. But I also have, I think, a nifty way of helping people understand it in a sort of, down to earth way. I always say that the genius, if you will, of Muhammad is that he took tribalism, which was endemic to 7th century Arabia, and he re-articulated it through a theological paradigm, which made it everlasting and much more powerful. So what I mean is, as you know, tribalism is, which all peoples, most of them had it historically. It's basically us against you. And that's it. You are the enemy because you're not a blood kin of mine. You're my enemy. Brothers are closer and they'll fight cousins. And then the brothers and the cousins will fight together against, so it's that mentality. And I don't think people understand, but to be outside the tribe means essentially to be non-human. You are free game. If you're not part of my tribe, I kill you, I enslave you, I do whatever. Okay. And that was the world that Muhammad grew in. And if you look at the Quran and some of the teachings, especially the one known as al-wala wal-bara, right? Which you can translate, I often do it as loyalty and enmity, or even more simply love and hate, allegiance, disallegiance. According to that, so Muhammad basically took the idea of tribalism, but changed it. So now it was no longer blood kin, it was the believers, the ummah. Whoever's part of Islam is my tribe member, and whoever is outside of it is the enemy, is the non-tribal fellow. And one of the reasons that I've found through my historical studies that really supports this is that all the peoples who actually converted to Islam in mass were tribal people. Okay, so first, of course, the Arabs, later on the Berbers of North Africa, the Turks, and then the Mongols. Later, groups of Mongols did become Islamic. And all of those people lived according to tribal principle. And if you look at one of the oral, they're written down later, but the early oral traditions of the Turks, Dedi Korkut is the book. And they have them kind of like, you have what they thought before they became Muslim, and then you have when they had just become Muslim. And right before they become Muslim, they're talking about, I killed whatever word they use for the non-tribal, the enemy, and I took his pretty girls and I burned down his home. Now they become Muslim, and all of a sudden it's, in the name of Allah, I killed the infidel and I burned his church. Okay, so it was the same exact thinking, but it was now repackaged through a divine paradigm, which made it so much more potent, because now it's what I call a win-win scenario. Before, if it's just tribalism, you fight, you win, you plunder, or you die. Now you fight, you win, and you plunder, you win. And if you die, you go to heaven and you win again, because now you got the 72 virgins, and pure bliss. Okay, so I think that's the enduring legacy of Muhammad's genius, if you will, is that he just completely rearticulated tribalism, and he just gave it this powerful mold through deification, and that's kind of why it's spilled into the modern era, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
And to your point about, Muhammad's very earthly psychology, if you'd like, I think it was Aisha, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, who said something to the effect, prophet of God, it seems quite befitting how you always seem to get revelations that are in your interest, or something to that effect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, that's, I'm in a debate right now with one J. Smith, Dr. J. Smith, who's this chief proponent that Muhammad didn't exist, that theory. And what you're touching on, it just reminds me again, it's one more proof that Muhammad exists, is because when you really look at the Islamic scriptures, they're so unflattering, but they really capture a real person.
Right.
When you read between the lines, if it was fake, it should be polished and nice and wow, this guy is just perfect. But when you read between the lines, you get like what you're saying, which is basically his young child bride, Aisha. Muhammad, as we know, he gets revelations, right? And these become the Quran. And one of them, it was always convenient. So when he's in a pickle and all of a sudden he's like, I got a revelation from Gabriel. Okay. And this one was about, I think, how he, as opposed to most Muslims who get 4 wives, could marry more.
Exactly. Or yeah, when his son-in-law's wife is really pretty, he gets a revelation that he should go with her.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's exactly. Like, God, who is the ruler of an infinite universe that, as far as we know so far, is 16 billion light years in sort of its territory, is able to exactly cater to an individual's, desires, appetites. It's amazing. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and and there's so much more we can talk about that if you want to go down that, but I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so. For almost 30 years now, maybe even a bit more, I've been a professor for 31 years. I've been trying, given my background and knowledge in the area, to try to warn the West, right? Just like you did post, I think you said 9/11, you started getting involved and so on. In our unique ways, we've both been pursuing a parallel strategy of saying, hey guys, here are some issues that you might want to worry about in the West. Regrettably, I say this, I'm a very, as your former supervisor said, I'm a very optimistic person. I'm a very happy person. But yet, after 3 decades of trying to stand on top of the mountain and scream about the looming dangers, I mean, sure, I've changed a lot of minds, but those who are coming seem to be coming at a much faster rate than I can change minds. Am I being too pessimistic, Raymond? Can you give us some optimism, or am I exactly right that we are doomed?
What I'll give you is more pessimism, actually, than what you've even said, because I completely agree with you, and I'm going to give you a very modern-day example that completely validates what you're saying. So you and I have been at this for a while. My first article was published in 20 years ago, right around 2005 for the LA Times, and since then I've been writing and spelling out the dangers of Islam, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, let's move on to Syria and look at what's happening to the Druze, okay? And it's just, I'm sure it's just, so I've been watching some of these videos and they're just beyond horrific what they do. I saw a video of a man tied down, they burned him alive, screaming Allah Akbar. They throw him off roofs, they cut a woman, they raped her, cut her tongue out, and then with a knife carved a Quranic verse on her breasts. Really disgusting and horrific stuff. And in almost every case, they're screaming Allah Akbar. But here's the problem. It's like we've seen this time and time again, and it always comes from the same exact recipes. You're going to put Muslim fundamentalists who believe what they believe. I just tweeted or put on X Sheikh al-Islam Ibn al-Taymiyyah, his fatwa against the Druze, which is basically lay them low, destroy them, kill them, rape them. Okay, that's what he says on principle, and there's no chance for them to even convert because they're zanadika and murtadeen, which, as you know, they're hypocrites and apostates. They're the lowest of the low. And Ibn Taymiyyah is taught all throughout the Islamic world in Al-Azhar and so forth. So I'm not shocked to see that when you put people who take Islam seriously, like the new Syrian government, and you put this infidel minority, that they're going to butcher them. And the thing is, though, isn't this always the case? If you go way back, as far back as Reagan and all the way to Trump, Democrat, Republican, we're always siding with Islamic terrorists and empowering them. And then this happens. Okay. I mean, we can go into, I mean, I did a whole study a long time ago about Obama and how he meddled in the Islamic world and et cetera, et cetera. And wherever they meddle, and I mentioned Reagan, of course, because he used to support the Mujahideen, which became Al Qaeda, right? And it just never fails. And everyone thought, well, Donald Trump's different. And Donald Trump comes and calls this man, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who's actually Al Qaeda. Remember the ones who killed 3,000 Americans? He shakes his hand and praises him. I quoted him recently. I know this guy's a tough guy. I think he's going to give Syria a new chance. And lo and behold, the same thing that happened a decade ago, which is ISIS-minded guys are slaughtering Yazidis. Remember that? Here it's happening again. So it just seems to me that no matter what we say, what we do, it's just like a machine that is not going to stop and is not going to change. And I'm starting to get tired of even describing like what's happening to the Druze. It's taken on a voyeuristic quality. It's almost like all we want to do is, oh, look at the horrible things, and we wring our hands and hashtag until tomorrow the news tells us to talk and be angry about this thing, and we forget. You know, so it's just as you can see, more than you and Victor, I'm quite appalled and really jaded about the whole thing, because and it doesn't even matter at this point if U.S. leadership or Western leadership in general is naive or diabolical, because it's the same result in the end. You always have, wherever they go, Muslim terrorists come to power and innocents get killed, and then eventually the jihadists bite the hand that fed them and attack the U.S., Europe via 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my little spiel there.
Well, so one of the things that, so I don't know if you're familiar with one of my earlier books, The Parasitic Mind. The Parasitic Mind looked at what happens to human minds when they are parasitized by idea pathogens. So what happens to your mind when it is hijacked, right? And then in my forthcoming book, Suicidal Empathy, I complete the story by saying, well, what happens to your emotional system when it is hijacked, right? So empathy could be gamed to your detriment, to your suicidal detriment. And it seems to me that somehow the West has succumbed to both parasitic thinking and suicidal empathy. And so let me take some of the things that you mentioned. Oh, 9/11. Oh, well, 9/11 was really caused by the Jews. Okay. I try to engage someone and it's absolutely impenetrable. I cannot get through the fact that it wasn't the dirty Jews who did it. If you show me videos of the Druze being slaughtered, those are not, first of all, they're not true Muslims, right? So that's the constant thing we hear, right? My friend Ahmad, who is gay, eats prosciutto, and is married to a Jewish man, he represents true Islam. Whereas, Al-Zawahiri, is that his name? What's his name?
The Egyptian one or
the Egyptian one?
Yeah, Ayman Zawahiri.
Zawahiri, or the guys at Al-Azhar, or Yusuf Qaradawi, or the Al-Baghdadi, or any of those guys, none of them represent true Islam. Saudi Arabia doesn't represent true Islam. The mullahs in Iran don't represent Islam, because my Islamic store owner at the convenience store is a lovely guy. He's never hurt anyone. As a matter of fact, he always comes to our synagogue. So there is really, it seems to me, a frailty in the architecture of the human mind that makes it perfectly aligned with Islam coming in. Because if you look at the Battle of Yarmouk or any other battle that has ever existed throughout human history, there is a clear set of rules. We live on this side of the river, you live on that side of the river, we want your women, you want ours, let's fight and see who wins. It's a whole new ball game when one side of the river says, we don't fight. You guys are glorious. Please have at our children and our women. Take it away. Hence suicidal.
That's Europe today.
That's Europe today. That's Canada today. That's US tomorrow, inshallah.
Yeah.
So is there any vaccine? I mean, I try to develop mind vaccines, but I feel as though I'm losing the battle. Is there any mind vaccine that you could think of that can autocorrect this? Or are we really just going through a slow eventual demise, whether it be in 50 years or 500 years?
Well, you touch on a really important point, which is, a lot of people think that facts and making the correct argument and proving your point is enough. And unfortunately, it's not, because of psychological and emotional reasons that you mentioned that people cling to. And so I think that, the only remedy is things will get worse before they can get better. There's that, I'm sure you're familiar with this saying, something like, strong men create good societies, yes, and good societies create weak men, and weak men, weak societies, yeah, until the society breaks down, then strong men rise again. So unfortunately, that may be the case, that it's just gonna, when I look, what you're talking about, and when I look at Europe and Canada and these places, I've never seen who has ever seen something where one group of people have a history and a doctrine that hates you, and they make no qualms about hiding it. They're constantly saying it. And then the other group goes out of their way to bring them in. And if then the citizens, the native citizens, the native Europeans notice and complain because their people are being raped and killed, then you shut them down. Okay, I mean, this is what madness is this? I mean, you'd say it's suicidal, parasitic. It's all that and more. You know what I mean? And and I don't know. Again, the big question is: this intentional? Is this naivety? Again, doesn't really matter if they're fools or liars. It's the same end result that people have to deal with. And I mean, I think we're at a point now where it just does. The model's broken. You're not gonna. It's not gonna be about who I vote in or who I vote out. Okay, that model's broken. And and as long as the people just stay there and they think somehow some leader is going to change it, I don't think that's going to happen. It's just historically, how does change happen? It happens through revolt. No one who's in power is going to actually willingly go, okay, you guys made a good point, I'm out of here. Here you go. I'm giving you the reins of power. And so I think, but at the same time, I believe there's been ongoing kind of emasculation of men, especially when you look around, this whole transgender and, emasculation of men and empowerment of women, whatever you may think it is on the surface. I'm starting to think that one of the reasons is to really take down the natural people who are in charge, men, the ones who can make a change. Okay. You take them down, you emasculate them, you make sure they act like women, and then you empower the women who never will be a threat. And now you can control a society. And so I think that that is one of the ingredients, because despite what I've just said about there has to be some sort of revolt in some way, your Western man can't revolt. I mean, I'm sure there's little pockets, but I'm saying by and large, these are the people who are like, they cringe at, the wrong word. These aren't people who are going to make a change. And I think that is intentional. It was intentional to weaken them and turn them into spineless jellyfish who just care about their, hedonistic pleasures. And now you can easily control them. So long story short, yeah, it's going to get a lot worse before it can happen.
And by the way, speaking to your point about the feminization, I've mentioned on several shows, and I actually have a section in my forthcoming book where I talk about what many Muslim men have told me, that the West is akin to a woman to be mounted, terkaba. Right? You betnika, right?
Yeah.
You F her.
I've heard that too.
You mount her.
Yeah.
The Western mind
wants it. The West wants
exactly. The Western mind doesn't understand that. This is what I call a lack of cultural theory of mind, right? You and I could not understand each other because we don't speak a common language. I may speak English and you only speak Mandarin. That might be. But we could speak both the same language, but we don't have the same cultural reference points, right? So in the West, kindness, generosity, magnanimity, beneficence, it's called weakness.
It's called you're inviting me to attack you.
You're inviting me to F you and F your children and your women. You're a punk, right? So I presume that you've had access to, at least, I'm Canadian, you're American. You've had access to American politicians, yes?
Yeah, in limited ways.
Do any of them get it? Like, you don't have to mention names if you don't want to, but do some of them say, I get it, I'm on it, or are they all bathing in the pool of suicidal empathy?
No, I've been around many who say, I get it, but I think they're just saying whatever they have to say to get out of the meeting. And then they move on with their normal, whatever they think. They're being diplomatic, in other words, and they don't want to look stupid. But the point that you're saying, which I'd really like to emphasize, which is, and the irony is, here's the Western mind. The more Muslims lash out, the more that's proof we did something wrong, and we have to appease
Yes.
them.
I'll tell you
And
a
the
great
worse
story.
it gets, the more we have to become doormats. And yet, the more you become a doormat, that just enrages them more to attack you. So it's like an insane circle.
I'll tell you a great story that speaks exactly to the point that you just said. So I think it was 2013. I had been invited to give a couple of lectures in Oslo, Norway, and so the host who picks me up at the airport is a Norwegian man, a white guy, Norwegian, actual Norwegian guy. And as I get to the airport, I notice it's filled with Somali hijabbed women, and so I sort of turn to him. I say, "Wow, I didn't quite expect Oslo to be Mogadishu. How is it going with the integration of the noble, peaceful Somalis?" And he looks at me, and I could almost predict this. He goes, "Oh, it's really not going well." I say, "Oh, yeah? How is that? Does that surprise you? Did you think otherwise would happen in Norway because there is such cultural similarity between the Somalis and the Norwegians?" He said, "No, I think we've really failed in our ability to provide them with a hospitable." And so for the next 5 minutes, he explained to me that yes, the Somalis and other Muslim immigrants were, there was a major problems in Norway, but the clear conclusion of that is that it had absolutely nothing to do with them, and it demonstrated how shitty the Norwegians were. Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly, and that's why the worst their behavior, the more appeasement, and again, you're the psychologist, but it's how the Western mind is thinking is just, it's just baffling. And here's another point I've been dwelling on. The white, as in Norwegian, Nordic, European sort of population of the world is something like, I don't know, 3 to 6% of the world, okay, of the world. And yet this is the one group that has to let everyone in, that has to suppress its culture, its religion, its heritage, that has to shut up. I often say jokingly, but maybe it's not a joke. I'd like to start seeing, preservation parks for white people where they can roam before they totally become extinct. I mean, think about it. This is 6%, okay? And yet you're treating the 96% as if they're the ones that you're, and it's also arrogant because it suggests like, I'm so powerful, I don't have to worry about numbers, but it's like you are just, and then the birth rate is nothing, it's negative, and the Muslim birth rate is quadrupling, in Europe. It's just so baffling. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, so we were talking now about sort of the politicians, being suicidally empathetic and parastized and so on. But let's kind of bring in the dynamics of Christians. So you're Coptic Christians. I think Egypt has 10% Coptic Christians, correct?
Yeah, they say anywhere between 10 and 15.
Okay, exactly. And of course, once upon a time, it was all Coptic Christians.
Yeah.
Gee,
Yeah.
I wonder what happened to those numbers.
Well, they saw the light of Islam and just converted in droves out of enthusiasm.
Peacefully,
Yeah.
right?
Of course.
Exactly. Iraqi Christians, what happened to them? Syrian Christians, what happened to them? In my own lifetime, I grew up in Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a Christian majority country. Within my lifetime, it is now substantially Muslim majority country, and on and on and on. Now, the reason why I'm setting this up is because when I often receive messages from Western Christians, these are rabid Jew haters. What they will say to me is that the real problem is not Islam. Like they're huge Christian lovers, their Christian identity, but the real problem is that they hate the Jew. Let me give you one or two examples. If I post the names of the grooming gang rapists in Britain across 40 different cities in Britain, let me just summarize their names for you. Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad, 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 Ahmad, Muhammad, Hussein, Hussein, Ali, Muhammad. And when
Mustafa.
Mustafa, exactly. Mahmoud, once in a while we change it. We change the variation of the spelling of Muhammad. Sometimes it's with one M, sometimes it's with two M's, sometimes it's with E, sometimes it's with A. When I say sarcastically, of course, I'm not smart enough to be able to see any unifying link across these noble, peaceful, undocumented lovemakers. is there anybody who could help me with this? I will get thousands of responses. Yes, effing Jew. It's the Jews who did this. So then I write back and I say, wait, hold on. I just want to make sure. Three Mohammeds gang raped a girl in Rockdale. It's due to the Jews? How? By the way, Raymond, do you know how it is due to the Jews?
No.
It's because who let them in? Did you not know that the immigration policy in Italy, in Sweden, in Norway, in France, in Britain, in Spain, in Canada, all of the immigration policies of those countries, the real architects behind it are the Jews. So sure, you could be an Islamophobe and blame the Muhammads for the gang rapes, about 250,000 in Britain alone. But the real culprit is the Jew. Now, the ones who are levying that message to me are not Muslims from Al Azhar. They're guys who've got in their bio, Christ is king. So how can you win a war against Islam when we supposedly, the Jews and the Christians have a common, quote, enemy, and yet you're turning on the Jew as your real enemy?
I mean, look, the bottom line is facts are facts. And if you want to believe that, let's say, the Jews are in control of every European country's politics, okay, fine, believe that. But you know what? Then that leads to another question. What does that say about you and your leaders, the native inhabitants? Okay, that makes you extra pathetic, doesn't it? Go fix that. Okay, if you, in other words, what are the Jews all powerful gods? If that's the case, go fix it. If you really think that's the case, right?
Well, we can fix it. We kill all of them. That's why Hitler was
Well,
so
no,
great.
I mean, prove it first of all, and put one of your own actual national leaders. Let them be in charge. But when I even look at other leaders, Viktor Orban of Hungary, who doesn't conform to that formula, he actually likes the Jews in Israel. Okay, so what's there to say? It's one more of the scapegoat kind of thing. Who is you just mentioned it? Who's doing the raping? Is it the Jews or is it the Mustafas and the Muhammad and the Mount? Okay, so kind of, it's just, it may be another way. You know how we just said the appeasement. Okay, kind of like instead of confronting reality, I blame myself. Well, now I also blame the Jew. So let's blame anyone and everyone except the problem. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Because that's acceptable. But to say, and again, I think a lot of this has to do, a lot of Jews look white, right? I mean, they're white, kind of. Whatever. I don't know how to explain it, but a lot of European Jews are white looking. So I think there's this also idea of race. The Europeans are so terrified of the word racism. And if you accuse them of being a racist, so if you're brown and you're a Muhammad, I'm not gonna say anything against you, okay? But a Jew, I mean, they look white, they're kind of European. I'll attack them because that's
Jeffrey
easier.
Epstein was Jewish, so it's not true that the rapists were Muslim because Jeffrey Epstein is Jewish. No, but I mean, I say this as if I'm joking, but I literally receive thousands of these a day. I mean, yesterday I posted a tweet, which is now pinned on my profile, where I genuinely said, it was very heartfelt. I said, I've been doing this for over 3 decades. And yes, I've received millions of lovely messages from people, but I also receive unbelievable threats and insults and harassment. And, I've taken now a 2-year leave from my home university because of all of the threats and all the difficulties that I face in Montreal, which is turning into another European reality. And so I was thinking at one point, is it all worth it? I mean, I've done more than my fair share. I've done more than what 1,000 people will do in 50 lifetimes because it almost seems impenetrable. You want to wake up every day, Raymond, ready to take on the new fight. But it seems as though if you have your own people, I mean, you have Jews, which I call wood cricket Jews. Do you know this expression I use, wood cricket?
No.
Do you know what? So the wood cricket, it comes from the parasitic word. The wood cricket abhors water. It wants nothing to do with water.
Mm-hmm.
When it is parasitized by a hairworm, a type of neuroparasite, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump and commit suicide into water in order to complete its reproductive cycle. So when I see Jews with signs, Jews for Hamas, Jews for Palestine, I mean, you really are a wood cricket. And so now that's become known. This is kind of one of those Gadism terms, wood cricket Jew. So how can I fight against this enemy out there when the people within my tribe, to your earlier point, are turning their hatred towards their own tribe rather than to guys who want to rape them?
And you know what? It also, though, indirectly also proves your point because The problem, I think, is okay, people are angry at, let's say, the government of Israel, but then somehow that becomes all Jewish people. But
Right.
as you just pointed out, there's Jews who actually hate the government of Israel. So, to put them all as a monolith and a collective, again, in and of itself, that's problematic. I mean, I understand your main point is that there's Jews who are against you, okay? But that just proves that you can't talk about the Jews
Right.
because the Jews have diverse views. And it's just unfortunate this kind of that people conflate. Okay, oh, I'm not happy with Netanyahu, therefore the Jews rule and run the world and they're evil. It's a fallacy. You're jumping from a premise to a false conclusion. And but yeah, we're in a day and age, Gad, where there's a lot of stupidity. Okay, as I think I mean, you give it more euphemistic terms and scientific jargon around it, but to me, it's just stupidity, abject stupidity. And it's ultimately what's behind so much of what we're seeing.
The only thing I would say is that stupidity might be that I don't have a high IQ or I don't know I don't know that France is in Europe. I lack knowledge. This is unique in that it's diabolical because this stupidity is a flesh-eating bacteria. It
You're
eats.
right. It is a virus and it is parasitic. I'm just trying to use layman
Yeah,
terms.
I appreciate
That
that.
boiled down, they're just stupid. But you're right. I mean, there's obviously a nuanced understanding to why and how. But in the end, I just like to look at results, and whether, like I said, whether you're evil or you're just dumb, you end up doing the same thing. So it's that thing that we have to deal with, whatever the purpose or whatever the origin.
What do you think of your compatriot, Egyptian compatriot, who apparently people say that he looks like me? Not I look like him, he looks like me. The vile, orgiastically ogre Bassem Youssef. What are your thoughts on him?
Bassem
Do
Youssef,
you know who that
that's the
is?
comedian. The
He's the
comedian.
comedian who used to be a physician and
Uh-huh.
who now spends his entire life going on shows saying how evil the Jews, and then of course he catches it. No, no, I mean Israelis, not Jews. I love Jews. I have a friend who's a Jewish, but the Palestinian the Palestinian people are beautiful, right? ليش يا الله ليش يا الله ليش بيكرهونا يا الله? Why do they hate us, right? So you just bombed and killed and raped 1,200 people, but the Allah, why ya Allah, right? This is a very sort of Arabic form of lamentation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I strike you and then I scream to God, why do you hate me so, as I put out calls for your genocidal extermination. If you don't know anything about him, then we move on. But if
No,
you
no,
do,
actually, I don't know what he said, but you've told me what he said, and I'd like to comment about something,
sure.
which is okay. So here's the thing about Islam. Here's how, again, I have a very sort of, holistic look on things, and I don't really pay, to what's happening in the moment. But the general broad overview with the Palestinians and Israel for me is this. Islam has proven itself time and time again, okay, to not be able to live at peace with its non-Muslim neighbors, okay? You probably remember Samuel Huntington in his Clash
Of
of
course.
Civilizations.
Bloody borders.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right, okay? So this is the first premise, okay? The only way you're going to live side by side with Muslims is you are subjugated to them in a vile way, okay? You're a second-class dhimmi or
Dimmi.
whatever, mistreated, okay? And in worst case scenario, they treat you like the Druze, okay? So that is a fact. We can't get around that. Now, on the one hand, do I like seeing Palestinian women and children just being killed? No, I don't. On the other hand, I understand the situation, which is that the Israelis know that there can be no peace, no matter how the Palestinians act and what they say. So it's kind of like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If I play the game that the West plays and appease, then I get slow encroaching Islam beating me slowly. So I have to take the harsh way, or what appears to be a very kind of harsh, decisive way. So what I'm trying to say is, to their credit, the Jews and the Israelis know Islam. They understand it, and they're not going to do what the West does, which is appease it and try to play the nice guy. They understand, there's that saying, where I think it's like the Arabs either at your throat or at your foot. I mean, that is somewhat historically accurate, okay? And I would change it from Arab to Muslim in general, because that is the historical manifestation of Islam. It never once lived at peace with its neighbor when it could have attacked. Sure, when it was weak, it didn't. When it was weaker than its neighbor.
When
And
you
when it's
are,
strong,
yeah, and I mean, it's a central tenet,
yeah.
right? When you are weak, cry victim. When you are strong, show no mercy.
I'm going to tell you a very funny anecdote. I've been sharing it, which you might. When I worked at the Library of Congress, speaking of Somalis, there was a lot of them there. And, diplomat that I was, despite what I was doing, I was very friendly with them when
Sure.
we'd speak Arabic, because, they speak Arabic. And one of them was like their sheikh. He was like the wise elder. And he knew he knew Islam. But every time we talk, kind of have little debates, during lunch. And I would mention kind of verses. He would try to pull the, Islam is peace, right? And, but at the same time, he has the red henna beard. This is a Salafi, okay? So one time I explained to him the breakdown, as I understand it, of the al-nasikh wal-mansukh, right? The abrogating verses and the abrogated verses in the Quran, which for those who don't understand, basically the idea is there's a lot of contradiction in the Quran. And what Muslim jurists do is they look at what came later, right? So the Mecca Quran, which is when Muhammad was weak, outnumbered, it's the older version. That's where you get the peaceful verses, right? You have your faith, I have my faith. There's no compulsion in religion, etc. And then once Muhammad becomes powerful in Medina and goes on the warpath, that's now where you get Ayat al-Sif, right? Quran 9:5, fight, kill, beleaguer them wherever you find them, fight the people of the book until they pay tribute and feel humbled, etc., etc. Now, the other thing, so abrogation means you go by the newest, right? Because it was situational. But it also means that if you as a Muslim find yourself in a situation that's closer to the Meccan verses, you should act on them, okay? And the Meccan verses, again, are you're outnumbered, you're weak. So I laid this all out to this sheikh, right? And he tried to dissemble, right? And I kept saying, yeah, but the Medina verses are violent, but the Mecca verses, when you're outnumbered, yeah, you should say what you're saying. And he finally got frustrated and said, yeah, I'm living in Mecca. I'm in DC.
Exactly. Well, but so 2 points here I want to make. I want to talk about Reformation, if at all possible. I think not, but let's see what you think. And number two, to the point of when you're in the minority or not, I've always said, although it's not my maxim, demography is destiny, right? I mean, the greatest danger is just a numbers game. When they are 1% and 2%, it's not a big problem. They're lovely. They just wear cool sartorial scarves, and well, who cares? It's just a scarf. Why are you such a bigot, Professor Saad, taking pictures of from behind women that are fully veiled? It's just a cloth. Right? I mean, yes, and the Nazi symbol is just a geometric pattern, right? So there is symbolism, meaning behind those. The more veils I have, the worse it's going to get for Jews. That's a law of nature. So, number one, what are your thoughts on immigration? Can we sustain these levels of immigration? Are we already too late in the game? Can these patterns be reversed? Can Islam be compatible with the West? I know I've posed a whole bunch of questions. Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about Reformation.
Yeah, sure. So, I'll start off by talking again about Europe, because I think that's the most paradigmatic example, more than Canada and US, of course. But again, to go back to what I was saying about, small white percentage that just caters and appeases and capitulates before these hordes of non-whites, just consider what it means that in all these capitals of Western Europe, Oslo, you were in Norway, I think Brussels, I wrote an article, and I think I had like 8 capitals. The number one newborn baby boy name, Muhammad. Okay?
Yep.
And imagine this, would this ever happen and fly in any other civilization? Could you imagine India? The number one name is, Michael.
Forgive me for interrupting you, and I'm going to cede the floor to you. Imagine in any of the 56 Islamic countries in the OIC, the number one name is Moshe.
Yeah, exactly. What would that ever happen? Is that even conceivable in the mythical world? And even more important, should it be? I know we would say no, because that's your land, that's your country, that's your heritage. You should have your names and your people be the dominant ones, okay? And so that we're seeing this happening in Europe, again, underscores just the absurd insanity. But as far as the demographics are destiny, absolutely. I've seen polls, Pew polls that say something like Germany in 2050 or 2060, it's going to be something like 40% Muslim. At that point, game over, okay? because it's we've already established that the German man is not much of a man. No offense to those few ones who are, but by and large, they've been so emasculated, right? So that yeah, if it's four Muslims to 10 German men, you're done. It's over. Okay, it's already almost over. Seeing what's happening. So yeah, absolutely, demographics is destiny. It's really bad in Europe. Canada, you can speak better about that than I can. In the U.S., it's still a small number. Muslims, I think, are 1% to 2%, and maybe half of them are blacks who convert in prison. I understand,
Right.
but that doesn't make it all the better. I mean, it's better to nip it in the bud. And so now the question becomes, well, but isn't that racist? And, why would you not allow Muslims? And it just simply comes down to their belief system, which is so well documented, which is not open to debate. Okay. I always give these analogies, and I'll give you, okay, let me just pause that and explain
Please.
what a moderate Muslim is. Okay. Vis-a-vis the radical. The analogy I give is this. Okay. Nazism, right? Think of Nazism. Nazism is an ideology, and it's supremacist, just like Islam, right? It's racially supremacist. And yet we have a Nazi who was a ranking Nazi, Oskar Schindler, who helped Jews, right? And other undesirables, and he saved them at no small risk to himself, right? But he was a Nazi. So what do we make of that? Does that mean that he was, he believed in the tenets of Nazism, National Socialism, but when it came to, being a monster and killing innocent people, his humanity rose above it, and at least he didn't do that part? Or shall we argue that, no, he was following a moderate form of Nazism? I've never heard the latter. Nobody ever says that, and rightfully so, because that's stupid. But when we talk about, so-called moderate Muslims, this is the game we like to play. The fact is, Islam, like Nazism, is black and white, supremacist, violent, and intolerant. Okay? I mean, we can get into the verses and then what Sharia says, et cetera, et cetera. It is that. Okay? So you need to understand this is what a moderate Muslim is. He's the one that actually doesn't conform to it. He's the aberration. He's not a representative of it. I don't care how many they are. He's not representing a true Islam, just like Oskar Schindler didn't represent true Nazism. Okay, but we never do that. We play this game as if, oh no, the moderate represents true Islam, and then these radicals, they're a fringe. The reality is, no, the radicals are the ones who actually practice the true Islam. And so I bring all this up to go back to the demographic and immigration issue, in that this is the religion. So when you bring it in and you say, well, we live in a society that believes in freedom and religious liberty and women parading around in, bikinis, and then you bring in this mentality, okay, what do you expect is going to happen? I mean, well, how dense can people be? Of course, what you see happening in Europe, the rape gangs in England and Sweden, which went from having virtually no crimes to being the rape capital of the world, all thanks to Muslim migrants. Of course, that's to be expected. You can't mix oil and water together, and it's an ideological question. Now, again, this isn't a racial question. I'm not saying, oh, if you're ethnically Muslim, then you should stay out. It's an ideological. You could be white and believe that and need to stay out too. Sure. So, governments and countries are more than happy to say, oh, if you believe in a certain ideology, we don't want you here. But we don't do that with Islam, even though it's so straightforward. Well, not only is it straightforward, but its entire history is a manifestation of the violence that it teaches. So I don't know what the debate is about.
Yeah, so in chapter 7 of the Parasitic Mind, I have a whole section where I talk about, so forgive me, it's going to be a mouthful, but I'll explain it. Nomological networks of cumulative evidence. And this is a framework whereby if I want to convince you of something, I'll get you data from across time periods, across cultures, across methodologies. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm bringing in distinct lines of evidence, all of which triangulate to prove that my position is right. Well, if I were to build a nomological network of cumulative evidence in asking the question, is Islam a religion of peace or not, it would almost be impossible for me to come up with a greater set of unequivocal data that offers a clear answer that it isn't, right? So which religion is most likely to have converts after they commit terror attacks? Out of all the religions that exist, which religion is most likely to treat minorities the worst historically? Which religion has led to the greatest amount of deaths in its entirety? what do the canons of the religion say? You probably are you familiar with Bill Warner? Do you know who that is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Bill Warner, for the listeners who may not know, he's by training he's a physicist. He was a professor of physics, but then later in his career, he founded the Center for the Study of Political Islam. And so he took a scientific method, content analysis, and used it to study the contents of the key texts of Islam, whether it be the Hadith or the Quran or the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad. You could study its content to see, does it largely preach brotherly love and love for the Jews or not, right? And so the or how about databases for terror attacks? Since 9/11 alone, 47,000 plus terror attacks in nearly 70 countries by one religion. Does that suggest it is peaceful or not? But as long as you could come up with one convenience store owner named Ahmad, who is a very loving and peaceful guy that you're friends with and you play soccer with on Sunday, then that is the real representation of Islam.
Not
Unless,
only that,
yeah, go
not
ahead.
only that, but all those extreme, high, and disproportionate number of terrorist attacks ultimately prove how the grievances that Muslims have because they're
Exactly.
being mistreated. So
Exactly
you
right.
need to work harder at it.
Exactly right. Okay, so I promised that we would get to Reformation. So
Okay.
if we can't get the Western politicians to change their minds, if we can't get the average Westerner to not succumb to parasitized thinking and suicidal empathy, could there be a Reformation project like has happened in other religions, whereby Islam in 50 to 100 years is largely the spiritual element and all of the political stuff ceases to exist and now we can all get along? Is this possible or am I speaking nonsense?
No, I don't think it. I mean, look, anything's possible. And there's gay Muslims, there's Muslims who eat pork. So you can always have a group of people who say I'm a representative of this religion and they can do whatever they want, right? But as an actual movement, in fact, when it comes to the Protestant Reformation or just the Reformation in general, I've written much about as an analogy, and I've argued that in fact what we're seeing in the modern era is a reformation of Islam that very much follows the Protestant Reformation, but because the core texts, the Bible versus Islamic scriptures, are so antithetical, we're seeing antithetical results. And so, allow me to unpack that briefly. The Protestant Reformation at its core is basically a rejection of centuries of tradition, ecclesiastical authority, and just going to the scriptures, right? Sola Scriptura, the Bible by itself, okay? And this was very much aided by the printing press. I mean, they were coterminous and people could not read. And so that happened. Now, what happened recently, most people don't understand, but historically, your average Muslim and your average Arab is illiterate. Okay, you didn't have printed books of the Quran. At best, you had one sheikh who maybe has it and, he preaches from it, etc. But now in the Islamic world, it's very much like what is happening in, let's say, 16th century Europe, where they do not just the printing press, they have the internet. Now anyone can access not just the Quran in any language, okay? Historically, if you were a non-Arabic reader, you had to read the Quran in Arabic and not even know what you were reading and just recite it by route, okay? Which was, I guess, was a good thing. But now it's translated in all these other languages. You can read the Hadith, okay, which is very violent, the Sirah of Muhammad, the Tafsir, etc., is now available for everyone. So to me, much of what is called Salafism or Wahhabism, which they trace to Abdul Wahhab from late 1700s, who's called a reformer of Islam. So what did he do? He sort of did the same thing. He basically said, hey, there's been a lot of accretions into Islam. We need to get them all out, and we need to go straight to the written texts, okay, the Quran and the Sunnah as captured in the Hadith, etc. And what happens when you look at those? Well, you become ISIS, okay. So this is a perfect example of that. For the Protestant Reformation it did turn out good because, okay, whatever you did, you ejected Catholicism, but at least you're based on the Bible, and the Bible teaches what? Monogamy, loving your neighbor, all the good stuff. All right. Whereas in Islam, kill the apostate, have 4 wives, have sex slaves. Okay. So it makes sense so in a way, I always say the Reformation of Islam is sort of unfolding. I think what's needed and what you might be referring to is not a Reformation, it's an enlightenment, which is a little different. An enlightenment would be more of, kind of like, all right, we've had enough of what this stuff says. and we still want to maintain our culture and our heritage. So we need to clean it up and kind of get rid of. One example is there's a group that's called the Quranists, and what they want to do, they basically say only the Quran counts, which of course is a radical idea, because for Sunnis, the twin pillars are the Quran and the Hadith as the Sunnah. So if they could do that, of course they're considered heretics. But if you do that, sure, you got rid of a lot of problems. Okay, because the Quran itself is, as you probably know, it's very poetic, it's very ambiguous. Of course, the tafsir and the exegetes usually give it very negative spins, and a lot of it is negative. But if you can actually get rid of the Hadith, okay, that would be a great step forward. You could become that would go hand in hand with a sort of enlightenment of Islam. But again, they are considered heretics, and they're not even 1% of the Muslim world.
Yeah, so Imam Tawhidi, who's a friend of mine, I don't know if you know him, the Australian cleric, who's actually, when you hear him speak, you would fall in love with Islam, because he seems to support all of the secular values that you and I would support. I think he would argue exactly what you just said, which is stick to the Quran, forget the Hadith. But here's an idea I have. So, and I don't know how you would do this canonically. Earlier, you mentioned abrogation, and again, let me repeat it for the folks who don't know what this is. You've got two passages in the Quran that says A and not A, meaning there's a contradiction, perfect contradiction. The later verse abrogates the earlier verse. God can change his mind. It's situational. He used to think A, now he thinks it's not A. Is there a way for us to discover maybe the head of Al-Azhar University in Egypt, or whether it be the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, discover a new supra abrogation wand that says everything that was violent is now abrogated? Because for some of the purists, Islamic scholars who need to base their worldview in the canons of the text, you need to find a mechanism to abrogate all that stuff. Otherwise, even with the enlightenment that you're speaking of, if I am a purist, I go back to my book and I say, no, I've got to kill the bastard Jews. So is that even feasible, or is that science fiction?
I'll tell you what I'm familiar with and what I've seen. One argument that some of the reformers have tried to make about the Quran is they say that, there are violent verses, but they were meant for that time and that place. They're not meant to apply to us. What's interesting about that argument is I've actually used that argument to exonerate the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures. So as you know, a lot of people play this equivalency game, and they say, oh, the Quran's full of violence. Well, look at, the Jewish scriptures. They got genocide and Joshua. Yeah. And my response to that is, you're right. Of course, the Old Testament is very violent and bloody, but it's not used in open-ended language. You're supposed to, fight and kill Jebusites and Hebusites, etc. These are people that don't exist anymore.
Exactly.
All right? If you look at the Islamic, the Quran, it's not like that. It doesn't say fight the Persians. It doesn't say fight the Byzantines or the Romans. It says fight the kafara, the infidels. Yeah. That is open-ended language. Infidels are still alive and kicking. It's us, the non-Muslims. So that has always been, you can do this mechanism with the Jewish scriptures, because I think they're temporal. A lot of what God is saying was for those people living at that time. And I'm sure other people would argue, but at least they have names. He doesn't say fight Gentiles, right? He says fight these particular people, whereas Islam doesn't do that. So my point is, that could have been a mechanism, and a lot of Muslims try to argue for that. But the reason it doesn't work is for the reason I gave, because the language, it doesn't say, so Quran 9:29, right? Fight the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, until they pay tribute, jizya, and feel themselves subdued. So look at how open-ended it is. Who are the people of the book? Christians and Jews. And when do you keep fighting them? Until they pay tribute and are subdued. Well, there's a lot of Christians and Jews who are not paying tribute and who are not subdued. Therefore, the verse still applies. That's why I honestly think, and this is why I respect apostates more than the people who play the moderate Islam game. I understand why the latter do what they're doing. They don't want to rock the boat. Maybe they don't want to get killed. But when you become an apostate, you've reached the point where you finally said, look, this can't be rehabilitated or salvaged. All right, I got to go. But if you try to do the whole, I want to use an enlightened form, yeah, you can do it. I said, as an individual, you can do whatever and you can believe whatever. But is it going to catch on? Is it going to be part of the Islamic
Exactly.
world? Highly unlikely.
Well, and I mean, the Quran states it is the final inerrant word of God. So that already removes the Reformation. It's kil harf is perfect.
Yeah, yeah,
Every
yeah.
syllable, every letter is perfect.
And the gates of ijtihad shut down
Shut down, exactly.
in the 10th or 11th century.
I'm asking you here to look into the hearts of individual Muslims, and you may or may not be able to do so, but there are roughly about 2 billion Muslims, many of whom are perfectly lovely and kind and gentle and peaceful. But yet they decide that they're going to say, I am a proud Muslim, notwithstanding all of the information that we have. Is it because they don't know the truth about their religion? Or is it they know the truth about their religion, but they're doing what I call cafeteria Islam, which is I pick the parts that I like and I ignore? Because otherwise, why would you choose to associate? I mean, if I knew right now that Judaism, I'm not very religious, but I'm very much steeped in my Jewish heritage because there's a very earthly component to being Jewish. It's part of a shared people, just like Egyptian Coptic Christians are a real people with a lineage. Now, you may believe some of the religious doctrines or not, but you're still a Coptic Christian. Are most of them being Muslim in the way that I am Jewish, or do they believe all this stuff in their books?
Believe it or not, I actually think the former. I think, and it almost makes it more dangerous. And so here's what I'm saying. And this is one of the weaknesses I believe. Those that the anti-jihadist movement or whatever however they're presented, is they're sticklers about what the Quran says. The Quran says this verse, and then they act like because the Quran says this, every Muslim's brain does that. Okay, and that's not realistic. Okay. Of course, the radicals, the fundamentalists, the Salafis, yeah, they do that. But the vast majority don't. But on the other hand, it's what you touched on earlier, which is, they're proud of their heritage. And they're not going to, even no matter what they know about it or what they don't know about it, this is us. And, Arab pride and Arab honor. We're not going to we're not Westerners who spit on our ancestors. No matter what they did, we're going to praise them. We're going to elevate them and we're going to venerate them. Okay. I think that's the Muslim. That's most people outside of the West, I think, which is its own interesting and curious topic. But so I think a lot of Muslims, it's more, it's cultural. This is our heritage. This is our people. And if to criticize them, you're criticizing me. Okay. Because of that, that whole lineage that I'm Ibn, right? It's not, again, this is one of those sort of disconnects that Westerners don't understand of how Muslims think. So I think so for example, let's say, anger or hatred towards Israel. It's not because they're quoting the Quran. You'd be surprised. ISIS goes out of its way to say, no, it's not time to hit Israel now. We have to, take out Assad or do this. But your average Muslim who probably doesn't know the Quran, he's the one that's so angry because it's a pride thing. You're, our people, our Muslims. And again, so that's why I say maybe even more tenacious than, just being a literalist who, okay, the Quran says this and I'm going to enact it. Right. It gives them the sort of, extreme tenacity to just follow, be part of the team, part of the ummah, part of the tribe that is against everyone else.
It's going to be tough to conquer this problem. What are some projects as we come towards the end? Of course, I could speak to you for 5 hours, but I don't want to keep you too long.
Thank you.
What are some projects that you're currently working on other than, of course, please mention your forthcoming book to us so that people.
Sure. Well, that's the one which I'm dotting the I's in. Literally, I just finished some maps and I'm now trying to select pictures, but the book is written. It's called the Two Swords of Christ, the 5 centuries of war between Islam and the warrior monks of Christendom. And why I wrote that, it's basically a trilogy. My other books, Sword and Scimitar and Defenders of the West, they all complement one another. But this book, and why I called it the Two Swords of Christ, it's a pun. You may be familiar with Jesus. There's a verse in Luke where he actually says, you sell your garment and buy a sword. And then the disciples say, here, Lord, there's 2 swords right here. And he says, that's enough. Okay. Now, medieval Christians understood it in a certain way, which I'll get to, but modern Christians have totally allegorized it. It means absolutely nothing. Okay. He's not talking in any way, shape, or form of defense. Okay. But to medieval Christians, what it meant is, and which I find interesting, is that two swords are enough because one is against spiritual forces, which modern day Christians agree with, and one is against physical human forces, which
Right.
they don't. And that's actually how it was understood. And so I called the book Two Swords of Christ because that was the rationale for the military orders. And the two groups, the main ones that I write about, the Templars and the Hospitallers, were basically the two swords. They saw themselves
Right.
as that. So I find all that kind of thinking very refreshing. And I find a lot of Europeans also, because I want to inspire them and remind them, you don't have to always be a doormat. You can stand up for your culture. The irony of what we're seeing in Europe today is it's the antithesis of what Europe. We didn't talk about history, and we could have maybe at another time, but
Sure.
few people understand that, in the 7th century, if you looked at Christendom, the bulk of it was what we today call the Muslim world. It was in North Africa, Egypt, Syria, all the way to the Maghreb, Morocco, Greater Syria, Asia Minor, Anatolia. Okay, that was the bulk of Christendom, and Europe was the smaller, lesser brother. You had 5 seas. Only one was Rome, was in Europe. The other 4, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, later Constantinople, all conquered and swallowed up by Islam. So this was stuff that people don't get. And beyond that, Europe proper continued to be bombarded century after century until they were in Iceland raiding for slaves and screaming Allahu Akbar in the 16th century. Okay. And so, but what did the Europeans do then? They actually fought fire with fire. And that's why they had to come up with these militant verses to just defend their way of life, right? And it's so, to me, when I look at what they're doing today, I quoted some German woman, she's some councilwoman, I think in Munich, where she gets up and says, to all those right wingers, I want to say one thing. In 20 years' time, Munich is going to be less German than it is going to be Muslim. It's going to be more Muslim. And then she goes, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
Imagine that mentality. How was that born of the mentality I write about? And that to me is such a riddle.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait for your book. I can't wait to have you back on. I'm going to say something in Arabic. I hope you understand it. Allah يعطيك العافية.
شكرا جدا.
It's a way of sort of when someone's working hard, you kind of say that to them.
And I need it. So shukran awi.
Come back anytime you'd like.